Hello, we're going to review and react to an interview between Leslie Elliott and Gabriel Turner, an ex feminist that's also a licensed professional counselor. And she's based out of the Austin area, and she's going to talk about what feminism began as and where it's at now. And we're going to learn something today. Let's go.
So today I'm speaking with Darlene Lev. And Darlene, you're a writer who reached out to me recently after listening to a couple of conversations that we've had on this channel. I think for specifically some of the solid ground conversations. And if you don't mind, I'll just read real quickly the paragraph that you sent me, because I think it really sets up an interesting discussion. So you said, I was so taken by our childless women ruining the world that I plan to incorporate the dialogue into a chapter/essay for the book you're working on. I heard a lot of the cause of the problem put on men. I agree and have experienced this, but would like to explore how feminism destroyed the courtship that much more directly led to marriage and family formation. Born in 1961, I experienced firsthand the revolution from moms at home to moms at work, from courting commitment to courting instability. I've toyed with writing a memoir called My Dumb Feminist Life, which would examine the choices I made in fealty to feminist narratives and how self-sabotaging so much of it was. So I'm so interested to explore your perspectives on this, and I'll let you just open it up. What's kind of do you want to say a little bit about yourself first and kind of lay out a sort of the arc of how you've evolved in your thinking?
Well, one of the things that struck me about that particular conversation was, it resonates because I wound up childless myself and it wasn't necessarily intentional. But I also noticed, and I'm thinking you're all a little younger than I am, right? When were you all born on the panel about
I was
Gen
born in
X?
the mid 70s, and then another one of the girls is the same age as me, and two of them are a little bit older, but still probably Gen X.
Yeah. So I was struck by how the dialogue was. I couldn't find a good man. I couldn't find a man who would commit. And this is how I wound up like this. And then, I think one person, forgive me if I can't remember everyone's names right now, but I watch every episode, and the discussions are all so interesting. But I was thinking, I know what happened because I lived through that change. And it's sort of like, if you look at the French Revolution, the people who were coming of age right as the Reign of Terror starts would know something more than the people who are living in the aftermath and grappling with that. So my trajectory, my coming of age completely coincides with the sexual revolution when things really changed. And I like to say, and I have said to my students, probably at my own risk, that TV in the 60s was very family oriented, very much about being a good civic citizen. The morals were all, I would say, fairly universal: how to be a good person, how to handle the town bully, Mayberry RFD, family. And then we start getting into the relaxing the codes, and now there's murder and single police women, Charlie's Angels, which was a huge influence on me, and it just completely changed. And by the time I reach my adolescence, now there is abortion. And I even remember I was sitting on the toilet when I heard on a talk show in the next room that my mother was listening to that now, Roe v. Wade has been passed. And I remember thinking, oh, good, I can do whatever I want.
Wow.
And we also had the pill. And so, it's brand new. And when something is brand new, people tend to react to it, overreact to it. It really completely liberated me and my friends as teenagers into basically having a lot of casual sex.
Mm-hmm.
And it even seemed that you were supposed to, like the arbiters of correct opinions were imposing this on us, because I remember asking myself, and I know other women have said the same thing, why am I doing this? I don't really like it. It makes me feel bad. I'm also, regardless, sort of garnering a kind of a dubious reputation. But then I'm wired like that, and I can't seem to extricate myself from this habit. And, all of the advertising, much of what I was reading in teen magazines was sort of promoting this, you don't have to live like your mother, and you can live like a man.
So early on in the first 5 minutes, she's already given a great rundown of what was taking place then and comparing it to now. Let's just keep going as she divulges more information. History is where all of the answers are.
And another anecdotal evidence story, with anecdotal stories. Anyway, little lack of sleep last night. I had 5 friends that I hung out with in high school. We called ourselves the Coyotes. And our motto was, we can do what men do, and we can do it even better. And we would drive down the main street hooting and whistling at guys, and, drinking a lot, and getting ourselves in all kinds of sexual trouble.
City girls.
And recently we a few of us got together, and we were reflecting on that, and we realized that this was a very short window of time, because AIDS comes along in 1983 and changes everything. So I would say that people born between, say, 1958 and 1965 are the people whose life story sort of goes alongside this change. And in the essay, A Requiem for the Patriarchy, that I sent to, in the 60s, it really was like there was a dad in every house. There was only one household where there was no father. That mother was divorced and had a daughter named Tammy, and they lived with her grandparents. I am not going to say that those marriages were all happy marriages. I mean, even in my own household, it wasn't a love match by any stretch of the imagination, but absolutely it was a home. Very observant kids, spent a lot of time alone watching everybody. And I would say that in most cases, that was the sense that every one of those houses was a home. And for the most part, the mothers were all in those homes. And then the no-fault divorce thing comes along, and it's like everybody sort of jumps on that bandwagon. And by the time I get into high school, there were the kids whose parents were divorced, and those were the cool kids who could do whatever they wanted because nobody was around to watch them. We were going into those houses and smoking pot and drinking drinking their mother's alcohol. And, I would say that those were the kids, when I look back, who didn't really fare off very well. So, I'm grossly generalizing, but, on the other hand, I think I'm observing a trend, the breakdown of the family, the sort of permitting, getting out of commitments and not seeing things through. And I think where we are today is in a habit of not trusting that you can get through a bad period with a spouse or a partner, and see it through to the end. We are now wired to get out. And
this is social engineering. That's what she's describing. the the process of dismantling what's traditionally been held in high esteem as being diligent, hardworking, and committing to family in itself. And it started with a lot of outside influence. Let's go.
I've done that myself many times. And when I look back, I say, you know, the one marriage that I got out of, I really think I shouldn't have done that. I never really did any better. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and I made these choices by rote because I was listening to this other, you know, these sort of voices up there who are telling you what you're supposed to feel, what you're supposed to want. And now we have social media doing that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, some of the things I did were really incredibly callous and very much anti-family formation, anti-life. And, you know, that was the theme of the essay. It just seems that we are being guided in that direction to move away from all of the kind of social mores that encouraged us and facilitated family formations and producing life.
Mm-hmm. Wow, it's quite a retrospective. And your perspective is really fascinating. And it kind of seems like everybody has to want to change that altogether in a way, because you do have these cases of I'm men who have trouble finding a good partner but want that more traditional life, and women who want to find a good partner but have trouble finding someone, like the women on that panel discussion you were describing. A couple of them, their story was, yeah, I've been married, but my partner never wanted kids and wanted me to work. And, you know, it wasn't something I could just do, or I couldn't find a stable relationship where it felt like it would be safe to bring a kid into the world and not end up a single mom supporting my child. I didn't want that picture for myself. And so, you know, where do we go from this point? Or maybe this is too soon in the conversation to ask next questions.
Well,
but
it's
rather,
interesting.
yeah.
It's interesting because that is how it was, though.
Okay.
People got married and had children. Mm-hmm. That is the world that I grew up in. And so how did we get to a world where, and those were the same questions I asked myself, mm-hmm. I don't want to get stuck. I'm worried that he'll run off.
Mm-hmm. Which is what happened to me in both of my marriages. It's exactly what happened to me. Is you do have children with someone, and then you're left alone to raise your kids by yourself. You have to figure that out because the other person did not maintain a commitment. I mean, in one case, it was drugs and alcohol, pornography and strippers. In another case, it was sex addiction. And again, that same kind of spiral down and out of the relationship. And so when you see evidence all around you of that marriage is falling apart, despite, you know, one person can want to maintain, but if the other person doesn't, you know, how do we come back to something more stable when both parties, both men and women, and it's so broadly general when you say that, because that's not, those trends are there, but you can't distill the trend down to the individual. The individual stories are going to be different, but how do you get back to something where people value that connection if so many people don't? So many people are disillusioned and demoralized.
So that was a great stopping point right there, because this is why I talk to men about so much. Is rule number 5: men must exercise sexual discipline to be seen as credible leaders and maximize their opportunities. Now, if you think about what she just said about men having a lack of sexual discipline and creating these destabilized households, but she's also talking about the marketing and narrative and the social engineering campaign that put women in competition directly with men and challenge them to not be like their mothers. So this is the chaos that happens from their experience with it as it pertains to feminism and the social engineering project that we're currently dealing with now. And keep in mind, Gabrielle Turner is talking from her time in the 60s to present day. So let's just continue.
I think that it was I'm going to suggest it was women who created this problem.
That's big. That is very, very important for her to say that, because she's taking ownership of what the equity that women have in the situation, right? So that means it's a better conversation overall. This won't be combative or anything. This is just looking at history and taking it for what it is.
I'm not going to say that there haven't been ne'er-to-do men. In my own family, my grandfather's father ran off and created another family in Seattle, and left his mother with 9 children. But most of the men in my ancestry were family, fathers. Family stayed intact, not necessarily happy, but very much attached to their families. So how did this change? I would say it was feminism that gave men even more permission to take off. I would say it's up to women to bring it back. I think it was women, and this is the issue that I take with this whole patriarchy assertion. I think that women really always have been the ones who controlled men, and all of the inventions and things that we have today were, some woman, I'm sick of going down to the river to wash my clothes, and then he invents a washing machine. I'm tired of getting pregnant every year. Now we have the birth control pill. And, all of these things actually serve to liberate women from the enormous amount of work that they used to have that tethered them to the home and gave them, more freedom to go and out and work. But I would say that by sort of moving away from religious communities, questioning that, and then questioning the whole marriage and having children project gave men more license to behave badly and put women in this much more precarious position. They used to control men by, you're living in a town where everybody knows if you're the male who's treating his wife poorly. That's also part of it. We're more atomized, we're less community oriented, and you can get by with a lot more. I mean, even, where I live in Brooklyn, I'm so convinced that I'm invisible, that I'm not always aware of my behavior. I'm not always aware that actually people might know who I am. I really do feel like I'm walking around in a vacuum. And that might lend itself to behaving in, rude ways that I wouldn't normally if I were living in a community where I knew that everybody knew me.
So she brought up a part about patriarchy and how they had the wrong perception of what patriarchy actually is. And I'm going to bring up a video that tied to a woman that's been in Iran living in an actual patriarchy. So we're going to hear her side of things, and then we're going to come back to this video so you can have a comparison.
Hello everyone, so this video is for the people who are backing up Iran right now, mostly Democrats, that they are supporting Iran right now. So I want to go over a few rules and laws in Iran about women. Basically, it's everything against what Democrats believe. So if you're a woman in Iran, they see you as a half a brain. So you don't have the full brain. So let's say if you witnessed a murder and you're a woman and you want to go to the court and say that you witnessed a murder, there should be 3 women, so your witness, like your words, will be approved in the court, versus if it's a man and it witnessed a murder, only 1 man is enough. Why? Because they say women have half a brain. If you're a woman in Iran, you have kids and you want to divorce, you only can have that child until 7 years. After 7 years, your child is for your husband, and he can come and take the child away from you, and you might never ever see your child again. Or if he doesn't want to, he can leave just child with you, and there is nothing that you can do about it. If you're a woman in Iran and you want to divorce your husband, oh, you have to go through hell. But if your husband wants to divorce you, it's super easy for them. If you're a woman in Iran and you're being beaten up by your husband, and me as your neighbor call the police and say, you know, my neighbor is, you know, hitting his wife to death, police will do nothing. They will say, well, it's a family matter and it is his wife. So basically a wife for a man is like an object, just like they bought a car or something. So they will not interfere, and they will say that it's their personal problem, it's not our problem. If you're a woman in Iran and you want to travel out of country, you have to have the approval from your father if you're single, or your brother if you don't have a father. If you're married, you have to have the approval from your husband. So basically your husband has to sign a paper that gives you the permission to leave the country. And let's say your husband said you can't keep the kid. Until that kid is 18 years old, you have no right over that kid. Basically, if you want to leave the country, the kid cannot leave the country unless the father approves it and give the permission. If you're a woman in Iran, you can never become a judge, because they say women decide with their emotions, so they cannot be a good judge.
So we're halfway through this particular video, and I brought this up to compare a lady that's actually living in a patriarchy that has experience living in a patriarchy, and then comparing it to the emotional outbursts that feminism seem to be able to embolden in other women in America. So there's always a fault line between what people consider to be oppression until you actually compare it to somebody that's actually that actually comes from a culture that's rooted in suppressing the identity of women and them actually being relevant to society. But let's continue.
If you're a woman and you walk into your home and you see your husband with another woman and you get mad and you kill them, you will be hanged. But if you're a man, you walked in a room and get your husband with another man, you can kill both of them and nothing's gonna happen to you. In Iran, you will be hanged if you kill someone. That's the punishment. But if you're a woman and you kill someone and your punishment is hanging, but you are virgin, they will first rape you before they hang you. I know that you can't even put this in your imagination, but that is true. Because in Islam, you cannot hang a virgin woman. In Iran, if a woman does not want to sleep with the husband and have sex, and the husband basically force you and kind of rape you, actually it does not count as a rape. So your husband can basically force you to have a sex and there is nothing that you can do about it. In Iran, a woman cannot sing. No man can hear your voice singing. In Iran, if you're a woman and you get raped, do you know what's the first thing that they ask you? What did you do that they raped you? As a woman in Iran, we get sexually assaulted every day. Me, myself, I've been in Iran for 27 years. I've been sexually assaulted every day. Not by raping, but you walking in the street, they will touch your butt. They will touch you. They will say nasty things in your ear. You're not safe anywhere. You sit in taxi, a man next to you, they will touch you. There is nothing you can do really about it. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of choosing your sexuality, forget about it. You want to be a bisexual, you want to be gay, you want to be lesbian in Iran, forget about it. You can be, but there's going to be consequences for that, and you better not be caught. And this was just a very, very small amount of the things that's going on in Iran against women. So next time that any person that lives in Europe and in America and they want to support Iran's government, just think about all this and shame on you if you do.
Well, that's called perspective, folks. And when you hear someone else have, a genuine experience, that's an
Oh,
opportunity to learn.
we've sort of broken apart these communities that women actually held together. So where I grew up, my mother wasn't friends with everybody, but we knew everyone. I knew everyone in the subdivision, which family lived in what house, how many kids they had, and some sense of what the parents were like. Where I live now, I don't know. I don't have a clue.
Mm-hmm.
And the only time I did in Brooklyn was when I was not working. And I was home all day, and I wound up becoming friends with someone who had a kid. And then she and I were roaming around the neighborhood together, and I got to know everybody because she was more connected to the neighborhood because she had a child. And then my association with her connected me more. And that we look back on and say that was one of the best periods of time in both our lives, when we got also after work, people were coming home from work and they would stop by our stoop to talk. And I knew the kids. And then the building got sold and we were all dispersed, and that was the end of that community and that golden period of time. So, in my neighborhood, my mother had a few friends, and they became lifelong friends, and they connected over needlework and watching each other's children. And they were also all around the same age, which is another issue we can talk about. If everybody is dating toward marriage, which in my experience, that was thrown away. Now you don't know what you're doing. But everybody was dating toward marriage and family formation. And so everybody's around the same age when they're having their children. And this creates a sort of, a community. If I could quote myself from one of my own comments, nothing marginalizes a woman more than going childless. You want to avoid getting stuck holding the bag, but then again, if you end up with nothing, you're even more endangered.
I've said countless times to men, the only leverage that a woman can have in your life is children. And what she just said is that without children, women have less equity in society. So keep that in mind. That's how powerful sexual discipline is. That's how powerful choosing the right person to have your children with is, because the decisions that you make about a mate are the most important ones, because if it can create life, it can create chaos. But let's complete this.
Yeah, there's so many things you just said that are interesting threads to pull on, like the sense of anonymity that you describe, being out of touch with a community, feeling like you're just one of a bunch of people, but not part of any kind of meaningful collective. That is just like the internet, and you see all this terrible. It's like a hate machine. The whole people are like this, and this condescending, self-righteous behavior that you see all over the place. Yeah, the anonymity. I think it's hard to even fathom how much that's changed us as people. The sense that we aren't responsible and accountable to the people around us because those relationships are so fleeting or unimportant or insignificant.
And it's replaced religion, right? I mean, that's inside of us. And so we throw away organized religion, which is where we used to meet our spouses, which was community. My parents were a sort of a mixed marriage. My dad was Jewish and my mother not. And they sent us to Sunday school in the morning so they could have some time alone. But I still remember, that was a community. I remember the characters at the church and, the feeling that we all belong to this place. And then people, then the wisdom is to get away from that, because they're trying to control you and they're trying to curtail your freedom. But that is where you would have organically met someone to marry, that you might have grown up alongside and formed some kind of, friendship that precedes marriage. Whereas, you throw that away. What were my options for meeting a man in 1978, 79, 80, which is, the time period when, I would have been like 18 to 21, marriageable age back in the day. Bars, bars and concerts, where I'm high and I'm drunk, and, the wisdom is to try this person out right away on the first night and then try to cobble some kind of relationship out of it. I was almost never able to do that. And I was also never really able to advocate for myself and say, well, this is what I want. No matter what the arbiters, this is how I refer to them in my novel, the arbiters of correct opinions were telling me, I didn't agree with it, but I continued to act upon it. From, probably from the moment of I hit puberty, all I could think about was having babies. That was my instinct. That was what I wanted to do.
And this is why I believe sex education needs to be revamped, because when you come into your hormonal mixture of trying to figure out what do you fit at in society based on the psychology of where you live, and trying to balance what you want with the popular narratives, and you don't have enough information or experience to say what's right or what's wrong. So you tend to lean on your emotional discernment, which is usually not the best decision making. In general, you don't make good decisions when you think with your emotions. So you get these types of outcomes, and you can see that even in all her wise years, she has the ability to reflect on where she made mistakes in the absence of knowledge. But let's go.
I had a mother who was telling me that I didn't want to do this, and that's also part of my story, but I'm sure, other mothers were not.
Even married women were engineering their daughters to think like a single woman and raising their children on regret of their personal choices in their lives, because they always felt like something was better outside. And this is what she's describing now.
Saying that mine just so happened to be that way. You are not going to grow up and have, you are not going to have children. You're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. In other words, I'm going to fulfill what she didn't get to do because she had children. But, the message inside the house was the message that was outside the house too. And so here I am with a guy that I've slept with, but don't know, I don't know how to say, I really want a committed relationship. There was something shameful and humiliating about that.
Wow.
Then some years down the line, I have a friend saying, well, why can't you just tell him that you want to see him again? And I don't know how to do that. And then interestingly enough, whenever I did say that, they would say, well, that's not what I want. Whereas in my mother's day, that's just what people did. So there was no shame in saying that's what you wanted. That's just what people did. And if it didn't look like the relationship was going to be compatible for marriage, they would get out and go to the next one. But in my experience, it was, well, I want this deep down inside. I'm afraid to say so. Which guy is going to be the one that I can do this with? How do I even have that conversation? It was incredibly confusing. And whenever I have brought up feminism as sort of confusing things and creating chaos, people will inevitably say, but you have choices now. Well, I don't agree. I think women always had choices, and there were plenty of people in my, universe, older generations. There was actually my grandmother's cousin was a lesbian, lived with her partner, never, bought a house with her and lived like they were married. And my my grandmother would never admit that they were gay, but they were. Another friend of my mother's was a career woman who never worked and traveled the world. You never married and traveled the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if you look honestly at history, you could see women doing all kinds of interesting things. But what everyone was doing was getting married and having a family. And then, and then she would do something else when the kids were in school.
Mm-hmm.
But, in my generation, we were fumbling around, not knowing how to get what we deep inside really wanted. And the men were like, well, now that I don't have to do this anymore, I'm not going to do it anymore. So I'm going to go back to suggesting that it was women who gave men permission to be irresponsible. And the lack of community oversight also lends itself to that. You are alone in the middle of nowhere and no one's really watching you. And I'm not going to say that that's great either, but if we have to decide what really is better for everyone, perhaps it would be more connection around community and not politics.
Mm-hmm.
That we are all families that live in this place, and we collectively want to create a really nice place for us to thrive in. And in essence, that is the kind of place that I grew up in.
Well, I'm certainly no feminist scholar, and I don't know I don't know that much about feminist history, honestly. When I was younger, it was more in vogue to be a feminist, and now it's not. And when it was, I was kind of turned off by the harshness of what I perceived in it. This is coming. One of the things I think, like when we're talking about the post-industrial revolution timeline, we're talking about these radical social changes that are happening along sort of a moving river, lots of currents moving in and out. And so I try to resist the thought that it used to be like this, instead of just thinking like at this time it was like this, and then at this time it was like this. And so there's all these emergent qualities that are shaping the way people experience their societies, their families, themselves, their identity throughout this sort of modern era. And I have a sense that at some point there were good things that were done in the name of feminism in order to give women certain legal statuses and rights as people. And that I'm not really sure of a solid opinion on something like no fault divorce. To some extent, I think that it's a useful thing, because I've been in a relationship where I was being physically abused as well as being cheated on. And in this case, a lot of the things that happen in a relationship where there's domestic abuse are sort of subtle. It's kind of hard to build a case. And nobody's witnessing these things. It's he said, she said. And by the time you're in a relationship that's really contentious, both people are not being their best self. Both people are at times saying and doing things that somebody outside of the relationship would go, you guys are a mess. So there can be a lot of difficulty in, even if you were to bring all of this before, say, a impartial third party, getting them to say, okay, this is clearly out of line. You've got denial of charges, you've got whatever. So it becomes very messy if you were to have to prove that. And people in really bad relationships having the opportunity to say, I don't have to justify my reasons for leaving this. I want a chance at something better, where maybe even being alone is better than what I'm experiencing here. So I'm going to just take that chance. I'm not ready to throw that that ideal away. But what's interesting to me is sort of this thread that's running through my thoughts as I'm reflecting on the things that you're saying is this kind of the freedom that people have gained throughout this modern era has left us sort of seeking and expecting that we can perfect things, that we can reach something better. So like thinking about your mother and her saying to you, don't have kids, don't do what I did. She's wanting something for you that's better than her perception of what her life was like. Hello, today I'm speaking.
So I'm glad you guys stuck around, and we're going to come back for part 2. This is very interesting, and I'm learning something from it. Make sure you guys leave some comments and, some of your individual experience if you agree with what's going on here. This has been another episode of Beyond the Algorithm. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Go get the book. And most importantly, I will see you beyond the algorithm, because that's where life actually happens. Later.